There's a monument in the center of my lawn. It's not grand, not marble, and it won't be in any history books, but it's a testament to the single most important principle of modern American life: the glorious, unassailable right to be a pain in the neck when someone else starts it first. It's a 4-foot-tall concrete pedestal, perfectly square, and bolted to the top is a big, beautiful candy apple red button. Beneath it, a laminated sign displays the 3 most tempting words in the English language: "Do not push." Right now, as I sit on my porch sipping my morning coffee, I can see a group of kids on their bikes parked at the sidewalk, staring at it like it's the monolith from 2001, A Space Odyssey. They're debating what it does. They've been at it for 10 minutes. I know this because my entire life for the past month has revolved around this button. It's a symbol of my victory, my masterpiece of malicious compliance. And it all started because of the gnomes. Before the button, before the lawyers, and the local news, my life in the Pleasant Meadows subdivision was aggressively, profoundly tranquil. Pleasant Meadows is the kind of place that's so meticulously planned, it feels like a computer simulation of a suburb. Every lawn is a perfect 50-shade gradient of green. Every mailbox is the exact same shade of inoffensive beige, and every house looks like it was 3D printed from a template file named slightly dash different dash, but dash not dash 2 dash different dash family dash home.obj. I liked it that way. I'm Jack. I'm a software developer, and I work from home. My job is to wrangle chaotic lines of code into a state of perfect functional order. My home life, I felt, should be the opposite. I crave a little harmless chaos. My own personal patch of chaos was my garden. Specifically, my collection of a dozen garden gnomes, a whimsical inheritance from my late grandmother. She was a woman who believed that if something was worth doing, it was worth overdoing with a sense of humor. Her gnomes were not the demure, classical kind. They were gloriously tacky. There was Norman, perched on a toadstool with a fishing rod, his expression one of eternal, placid optimism. There was Natalie, a sunbather in a polka-dot bikini who looked like she'd had one too many daiquiris, and my personal favorite, Sir Reginald, a distinguished-looking gnome with a monocle, inexplicably riding a very confused-looking squirrel. They were chipped, their paint was fading, but they were a daily reminder of my grandmother's joyful spirit. They were my little rebellion against the beige tyranny of Pleasant Meadows. And in Pleasant Meadows, all rebellion, no matter how small, was monitored. Our overseer, our warden, our self-appointed queen of conformity, was Carol. Carol was the president of the Homeowners Association, a position she held with the grim determination of a dictator clinging to power. She was a woman in her late 50s who had weaponized passive aggression and wielded a clipboard like a scythe. I'd often see her on her daily patrol, a slow, deliberate march around the neighborhood. She didn't just look for violations, she hunted them. One time I saw her measure my neighbor's grass with a retractable ruler she kept clipped to her belt. His offense? His turf was a 1/4 inch over the mandated 3-inch maximum. Carol didn't see houses. She saw infractions. A recycling bin left out an hour past the designated time was a crime against humanity. A slightly too vibrant welcome mat was an act of open rebellion. My gnomes, I knew, were living on borrowed time. The end came on a Tuesday. It arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet, sinister thwack of a beige envelope being stuck to my front door. It was an official notice from the HOA, the kind of correspondence that instantly makes your stomach clench. I peeled it off the door, a sense of dread washing over me. Inside, printed on thick, self-important cardstock, was the death warrant. It announced the immediate ratification of a new bylaw, Amendment 1138. The prohibition of decorative lawn accoutrements. The language was a masterpiece of bureaucratic nonsense, clearly drafted by someone who gets paid by the syllable. It banned any non-essential, purely aesthetic or figural installations which do not contribute to the structural or horticultural integrity of the property. This broad catch-all category was referred to as yard art. As if the message wasn't clear enough, there was a courtesy addendum. Stapled to the main letter was a grainy black and white photograph of my front yard. My gnome collection had been circled in a thick, aggressive red marker, like evidence in a mob hit. Norman, Natalie, Sir Reginald, all of them, marked for death. The letter concluded by giving me a generous 48 hours to rectify the violation or face a daily fine of $50. I stood in my foyer, reading and rereading the words. Figural installations, I muttered to the empty house. I called my sister, Brenda, and put her on speakerphone, pacing my kitchen as I vented. They called them figural installations, I yelled into the phone, the letter trembling in my hand. Figural installations! They're gnomes, Brenda, my grandma's gnomes. The ones she used to talk to when she thought no one was looking. What's next? Are they going to ban squirrels for being unapproved woodland creatures? Are flowers excessively colorful flora? Calm down, Jack, she said, though I could hear the smirk in her voice. It's just Carol being Carol. No, it's more than that. It's the principle of it. This is my yard. I pay the mortgage. I pay the property taxes. And I'm being told by this petty tyrant that a ceramic gnome riding a squirrel is a threat to the cohesive aesthetic of the neighborhood? It's insane! The anger was real, but underneath it was a sense of profound insult. They weren't just attacking my property, they were attacking a memory. They were taking a piece of my grandmother's quirky joy and labeling it a violation. The war wasn't about the gnomes anymore. It was about everything. That evening, I performed what felt like a funeral march. I carefully gathered up the gnomes one by one, dusting them off and giving each a little pat on the head before placing them in a large cardboard box. Sorry, guys, I whispered to Sir Reginald. The fun police won this round. I sealed the box and carried my fallen soldiers to the garage, a tomb of forgotten hobbies and seasonal decorations. But I couldn't sleep. The injustice of it all was a buzzing hornet in my brain. So, around midnight, fueled by a potent combination of spite, indignation, and 2 IPAs, I did what any self-respecting software developer would do. I started looking for a bug in the system. I opened my laptop, navigated to the HOA's horribly designed website, and downloaded the complete 128-page PDF of the Pleasant Meadows Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. I read it cover to cover, my eyes scanning the dense legalese like I was debugging a critical piece of code. I highlighted every vague phrase, every poorly defined term, every potential loophole. Most of it was boilerplate nonsense about fence heights and shed colors. But then I got back to Amendment 1138B. The prohibition of decorative lawn accoutrements. The key words were decorative, aesthetic, and figural. The rule was written to ban things that were, for all intents and purposes, art. Statues, sculptures, figurines. Things whose only purpose was to be looked at. But what if I installed something that wasn't art? What if I installed something that defied classification? Something that wasn't decorative, but interactive? Something that wasn't a figure, but a device? My tired eyes drifted from the PDF to the software I'd been working on earlier that day. On the screen was a diagnostic tool with a huge, ominous digital red button labeled Emergency System Purge. My brain stuttered. The gears turned, slowly at first, then with accelerating speed, a button. A single, beautiful, mysterious red button on a pedestal, right in the middle of my lawn where the gnomes used to be. It wasn't a statue. It wasn't a sculpture. It was an interface. You don't just look at a button. A button exists to be pushed. It implies a function. And if I put a sign on it, a simple, elegant sign, the idea blossomed in my mind, fully formed and glorious in its absurdity. A sign that said, "Do not push." It was perfect. It followed the letter of their stupid law while gleefully drop-kicking its spirit into the sun. It wasn't yard art. It was a piece of psychological theater, a social experiment, a trap, a beautiful, minimalist, maddening trap. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, triumphant grin spreading across my face. Carol wanted order. She wanted conformity. I was going to give her a single, unsolvable question, cemented right in the middle of my perfectly manicured lawn. The gnome-pocalypse was over. The buttoning was about to begin. The problem with a truly magnificent act of spite is that you rarely have the skill set to execute it alone. I can build a website from scratch, but I can't mix concrete to save my life. My grand vision of a monolithic pedestal required a professional, a collaborator who could appreciate the sheer artistry of the project. I needed a contractor. The next morning, I compiled a list of local concrete and masonry companies and started making calls. The conversations were, to put it mildly, a comedic disaster. The first call was to Prestige Patios and Pavers. A very serious-sounding man answered. "Prestige Patios, this is Robert." "Hi, Robert," I began, trying to sound as normal as possible. "I have a small project I was hoping to get a quote on. I'm looking to have a concrete pillar installed in my front yard." "A pillar? Okay. For a gate? A light fixture?" "No, just the pillar. A plinth, really, a pedestal." There was a long, skeptical pause. "A pedestal? For a statue, I assume?" "Not exactly. For a button." "Ooh, a button." Robert's voice went flat. "Yes. A single red button." "Sir," he said, his tone shifting from professional to deeply concerned. "Is this a prank call? Are you with that morning radio show?" I assured him I was not. He politely informed me that Prestige Patios and Pavers was fully booked for the foreseeable future, and hung up. The second call, to A Plus Concrete Solutions, went similarly. The woman on the other end was initially enthusiastic, but her excitement curdled into confusion as I explained the job. "So, there's no statue? No sundial? No birdbath?" she asked. Her voice trailing off as if she was losing the will to live. "Honey, what in the world for?" I tried to explain the concept of minimalist interactive art, but she just sighed and told me she'd have to get back to me, which is the universal code for "I'm deleting your number as soon as we hang up." After 3 more rejections, I was beginning to lose hope. My masterpiece was going to die in the conceptual stage. Then I found a listing at the bottom of the page for Dave's Handyman and Concrete Services. There was no glossy website, just a name and a phone number. It had the distinct vibe of a guy who had seen things. I dialed. A gravelly voice answered on the second ring. "Dave?" No company name, no pleasantries. Just Dave. "Hi, Dave. My name is Jack. I have a weird request," I said, deciding to just lead with the weirdness. There was a chuckle on the other end. "Kid, after 30 years in this business, there's no such thing as a weird request. I once built a retaining wall entirely out of bowling balls for a guy who wanted to immortalize his 300 game. Try me." I felt a surge of hope. This was my guy. "Okay," I said. "I need you to build a 4-foot-tall, solid concrete pedestal in the middle of my front lawn." "All right, for what?" "For a button?" Dave didn't pause. He didn't question it. He just asked, "What kind of button?" I drove over to his workshop an hour later. Dave was a man in his late 50s, with a weathered face, hands like leather work gloves, and a seen-it-all attitude that radiated from him like heat from asphalt. His workshop was a chaotic cathedral of tools and half-finished projects. I laid out the napkin sketch blueprints I'd drawn up on his workbench. I gave him the whole backstory, the idyllic life, the beloved gnomes, and the iron-fisted reign of Carol, the HOA president. As I spoke, a slow, magnificent grin spread across Dave's face. He picked up my sketch. "Let me get this straight," he said, his eyes twinkling. "The HOA, led by Carol? Oh yeah, I know Carol. She tried to find me once for my truck being commercially lettered while I was fixing her own leaky sink. Banned your gnomes. So in response, you want me to build a municipal-grade concrete pedestal, bolt an industrial panic button to it, and put up a sign telling people not to push it?" "That's the plan," I confirmed. He slapped the workbench, a puff of sawdust rising into the air. "I love it. It's the most beautiful, pointless, and necessary thing I've ever heard of. I'm in." He looked at my sketch again, then at me. "And I'm giving you the PETA client discount." "PETA client?" "Yeah," he grinned. "Pain in the HOAs, you know what." With my contractor on board, Phase 2 of the operation commenced. Procurement. The button itself had to be perfect. This couldn't be some cheap plastic doorbell. It needed to have weight, substance, a sense of industrial gravity. I went down a deep internet rabbit hole, scrolling through pages of electrical supply websites, a world I never knew existed. I bypassed the elegant, modern smart buttons and the flimsy, momentary switches. I was looking for the button you'd see in a Cold War-era movie, the one the hero slaps to avert a nuclear meltdown. I found it on a site called Industrial Logic Systems. It was a Model ES-44 mushroom head emergency stop push button. It was massive, a solid 3 inches in diameter, and the deepest, most glorious shade of red imaginable. The description boasted of a twist-to-reset mechanism and compliance with international safety standards. It was ludicrously over-engineered for a project that would involve it being connected to absolutely nothing. It was perfect. I ordered it, along with a heavy-duty, weatherproof yellow casing that made it look even more official. Meanwhile, Dave and I finalized the plans for the pedestal. We settled on a form that would produce a pillar 2 feet wide, 2 feet deep, and 4 feet tall. It would be solid, reinforced concrete, an immovable object in the center of my lawn. We also planned to run a thin, low-voltage wire from the button's casing down through the pedestal and into an underground conduit that would lead back to my house. "So, what's this thing gonna do?" Dave asked as we mapped out the wire's path. "Launch nukes, open your garage door, order a pizza." "That, my friend, is the beauty of it," I said with a conspiratorial wink. "It's a mystery, but the wire makes the mystery plausible." The final and most crucial step was preemptive bureaucracy. I was not going to lose this war on a technicality. I drove down to the city planning office, a beige building filled with the palpable aura of quiet desperation. I waited 45 minutes to speak with a man named Stan, who looked like he had died of boredom 3 years ago, but his body hadn't gotten the memo. I explained that I was planning a landscape feature that would also serve as a base for a future electrical installation for safety lighting. I was careful with my words. I showed him the dimensions. He grunted, flipped through a thick binder, and confirmed my research. Per Section C, Paragraph 4 of the City Code, no construction permit was required for any landscape structure under 48 inches in height. "Can I get that in writing?" I asked. Stan gave me a look of profound weariness, as if I'd just asked him to personally carry a block of granite up a mountain. But he sighed, typed out a short memo on city letterhead stating that my proposed 4 feet pillar was exempt from permit requirements and stamped it with a flourish. I held the paper in my hand. It was my shield, my Excalibur. I was ready for battle. The day of the installation was a glorious Thursday. Dave and his two-man crew arrived at 9 a.m. sharp. Their operation was a spectacle of professional absurdity. They didn't just dump a bag of concrete on the lawn. They set up safety cones around the designated area. They used surveying tools to ensure the wooden form for the pedestal was perfectly level and centered in the exact spot where Sir Reginald and his squirrel once stood. The noise of their small cement mixer was a siren's call to the curtain twitchers of Pleasant Meadows. Within minutes, I could see them. Mrs. Henderson from across the street, peering through her blinds. Mr. Gable next door, suddenly finding an urgent need to weed his immaculate flower bed. It was exactly the audience I had hoped for. And then, right on schedule, the final boss arrived. Carol. She marched across my lawn with the purposeful stride of a general reviewing her troops, her clipboard held tight against her chest. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What is going on here? All construction must be pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee." I was ready. I sauntered out to meet her, holding my own clipboard on which I had placed my single, precious document from the city. I gave her my most pleasant, unbothered smile. "Morning, Carol. Lovely day, isn't it? Don't worry, I've checked everything," I said breezily. "Per Section C, Paragraph 4 of the City Code, no permit is required for a landscape feature under 48 inches. And per our very own HOA bylaws, this isn't technically a structure, it's just the base for a future electrical installation." Carol's eyes narrowed. She was a shark that had smelled blood, but couldn't locate the source of the wound. An electrical installation for what? "Safety lighting," I said, the lie slipping out as smoothly as butter. "For illuminating the walkway, you know, for security." She was flustered. She knew I was up to something, but my paperwork was in order. I was using her own beloved bureaucracy against her. It was like watching a vampire being presented with a cross made of legal documents. She furiously scribbled some notes on her clipboard, shot a glare at Dave, who gave her a cheerful, grease-stained wave, and retreated back to her house. The rest of the installation went off without a hitch. The concrete was poured, smoothed, and left to cure. For the next 3 days, a gray, monolithic, brutalist cube sat in the middle of my lawn, an object of intense neighborhood speculation. The mystery was building. The stage was set. All it needed was its star. 3 days later, the concrete was as hard as Carol's heart. The morning air was cool and still. The sky a perfect, cloudless blue. It was time. I felt a sense of theatrical gravitas as I walked out onto my lawn, carrying my tools and the two most important components of my masterpiece. First, the button itself, nestled in its bright yellow housing. It felt heavy, important, like a prop from a spy movie. Second, the sign. I'd had it professionally made at a print shop. It was white, laminated plastic with stark, bold sans serif black letters. The font was Helvetica, a font that communicates pure, unadorned information. It was the typographical equivalent of a brick wall. The installation was a 10-minute job, but I milked it for all it was worth. I meticulously cleaned the top of the pedestal. I carefully drilled the anchor holes. I tightened the bolts with a deliberateness that suggested I was disarming a bomb, not installing a fake button. Finally, the big red button was secure. It sat atop the gray pillar like a cherry on a concrete sundae. Then came the final touch. I affixed the sign to the front of the pedestal. I stepped back to admire my work. It was more beautiful than I ever could have imagined. It was perfect in its stark simplicity. The brutalist gray of the concrete, the industrial yellow of the housing, the urgent red of the button, and the cold, commanding black of the text. Do not push. It was an affront to everything Pleasant Meadows stood for. It wasn't beige, it wasn't symmetrical. It served no discernible purpose. It didn't whisper suggestions of quiet prosperity. It screamed a single, maddening question into the suburban void. The effect was instantaneous. A woman walking her poodle stopped dead in her tracks, the dog's leash going taut. The poodle, sensing its owner's confusion, began to bark at the pedestal. A mail truck slowed to a crawl, the carrier leaning far out of his window to get a better look. A group of teenagers on bikes skidded to a halt at the edge of my property, a low murmur of, "Whoa, what is that?" rippling through them. I watched from my living room window, sipping a freshly brewed coffee, feeling like a mischievous god who had just placed a strange new artifact on Earth to see what the mortals would do. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the apex predator of the neighborhood to notice it. I didn't have to wait long. It was maybe 30 minutes later when my front door sensor chimed. I looked at the security camera feed on my phone. There she was. Carol. Marching across my lawn like a soldier on a mission, her face a thundercloud of pueron, unadulterated indignation, I opened the door before she could even ring the bell, leaning against the frame with a casualness I absolutely did not feel. "Carol," I said, my voice dripping with false pleasantry. "To what do I owe the honor?" She didn't waste time with greetings. She just pointed a trembling finger at the pedestal. "What?" she seethed. "Is that—" "That," I replied, enunciating each word with exaggerated clarity, "is a button on a pedestal with a sign." "It's yard art," she screeched, the words exploding out of her. "It's a flagrant violation of Amendment 1138B, the rule we just passed." I feigned a look of thoughtful consideration. "Is it, though? Let's review." I had my copy of the HOA bylaws, already bookmarked to the relevant page, sitting right by the door. I picked it up. The amendment prohibits decorative, aesthetic, or figural installations. This is none of those things. It's not a figurine, like a gnome. It's not inherently decorative. In fact, I'd argue it's intentionally stark. And its primary quality isn't aesthetic, it's interactive. Or, more accurately, potentially interactive. Carol stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. I was speaking her language, the language of pedantic technicalities, and she didn't know how to respond. "Furthermore," I continued, warming to my subject, "the sign is purely informational. It provides a clear instruction. Are you banning informational signs now, Carol? That would make displaying house numbers a violation, wouldn't it?" "You are making a mockery of this community's rules," she sputtered, her face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "On the contrary," I said, closing the binder with a soft thump. "I am following them to the letter. This object does not fit any prohibited definition within our governing documents. I read them very carefully. If you disagree, please cite the specific passage that this installation violates. I'll wait." Checkmate? She had nothing. Her power was derived from the vague wording of the rules and residents' fear of confrontation. I was armed with her own rule book and a complete lack of fear. Defeated in person, she spun on her heel and stormed off, muttering threats about fines and legal action under her breath. The very next day, a beige envelope appeared, this time sent via certified mail, which is the HOA equivalent of a declaration of war. It was a formal notice of violation. It declared the unauthorized installation to be both a public nuisance and a potential safety hazard. It imposed an immediate fine of $50, with an additional $50 fine to be levied for every day the violation was not cured. It was my turn to draft a letter. I spent an hour on it, crafting it with the loving precision of a poet. I addressed it to the HOA Board of Directors, care of Carol. I used formal legal language. I began by stating that I formally rejected their notice of violation on the grounds that it was without merit. I addressed the nuisance claim by pointing out that the object was silent, immobile, and emitted no light, sound, or odor, and therefore could not legally be considered a nuisance under the state's definition. Then I moved on to the safety hazard claim. I find the assertion that a non-energized button constitutes a safety hazard to be curious, I wrote. I would ask that you please provide a professional engineering report detailing the specific nature of this alleged hazard. As the object is structurally sound and not connected to any power source, I am eager to understand the basis for your claim. I attached a photocopy of the memo from the city planning office, highlighting the part about it being permit exempt. I concluded the letter by stating that I considered their fines to be illegitimate and extra-legal, and that I would not be paying them. I informed them that any attempt to place a lien on my property would be met with a robust legal challenge, and that I would be seeking damages for harassment. I signed it, put it in my own beige envelope, and sent it back via certified mail. The ball was in her court. A few days of tense silence followed. The button continued to be the main attraction of the neighborhood. I felt a small victory, but I had underestimated Carol's capacity for escalation. On Saturday afternoon, I was watching a movie when I saw the flashing blue and red lights through my window. A police car was parked at my curb. 2 officers were getting out. One was older, with a mustache, and the weary look of a man who had seen every form of human stupidity imaginable. The other was younger, fitter, and had a look on his face that was desperately trying to remain professional, but was failing miserably. I met them at the door, putting on my best law-abiding citizen face. "Good afternoon, officers. Something I can help you with?" The older one, whose name tag read Miller, sighed a deep, world-weary sigh. "Sir, we received a call about a suspicious device in your yard." "You mean the button?" I asked, feigning innocence. The younger one, Davis, chimed in, a grin threatening to break through his stoic expression. The dispatcher said the caller, and I'm quoting here, was concerned it might be some kind of anti-government explosive device. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. A bomb? She had actually told the police it might be a bomb. The woman's audacity was almost impressive. "A bomb. Officers? It's a factory stop button I bought from an industrial supply website. It's not connected to anything. You're welcome to inspect it. Please be my guest." The 2 officers walked over to the pedestal like they were approaching a piece of abstract art. In a museum, Officer Miller circled it slowly. Officer Davis reached out and tapped the laminated sign. "Do not push," Davis read aloud, then looked at me. "So, now I really want to—" "I get that a lot," I said. Officer Miller peered at the casing. He was a professional, but I could see the absurdity of the situation dawning on him. "So, what happens if you push it?" he asked, the question the entire neighborhood was dying to ask. "Honestly, nothing. It's not wired up to anything," I said. Then, unable to resist, I added a little flair. "Yet." The 2 cops exchanged a look. It was a look of profound, shared understanding. A look that said, "We know exactly what this is about." Officer Davis turned to me, his voice lowered slightly. "This is because of the HOA, isn't it? We get calls from this street a lot, let me guess. Lady named Carol?" "Banned my grandma's garden gnomes," I said simply. A wave of comprehension washed over their faces. It was all they needed to hear. Officer Miller straightened up and adjusted his belt. "Well, sir, you're not breaking any laws here," he said, his tone officially shifting from investigative to advisory. "But I will say, tying up a 911 line for something like this. That's getting close to wasting police resources. We're going to go have a word with the complainant about proper use of emergency services." He looked from me to the button and back again, and a tiny smile finally broke through his weary facade. "Try to keep the, public art installations to a minimum, all right?" "Will do, officer," I said. I watched from my porch as they walked across the street and knocked on Carol's door. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I could see Carol's animated, furious gestures and Officer Miller's calm, immovable stance. The conversation lasted about 5 minutes. When they were done, the officers got back in their car and drove away, leaving a defeated-looking Carol standing in her doorway. Round one with the law had gone to me. The button was no longer just a neighborhood curiosity. It was becoming a legend. The police visit transformed the button from a neighborhood quirk into a full-blown political statement. You were either pro-button or anti-button. There was no middle ground. The button became a Rorschach test for the soul of Pleasant Meadows. For the neighborhood kids, it was a mythical object, their own suburban Excalibur. They'd ride their bikes to the edge of my lawn and just stare, concocting elaborate theories. I'd overhear them as I worked by the front window. "My dad says it's connected to the internet," one would say, "and if you push it, it deletes your homework." "No way," another would argue. "My older sister says it calls a pizza place and orders 100 pizzas to Carol's house." "I heard," a third would whisper conspiratorially, "that it makes all the sprinklers on the whole street go off at once." They'd dare each other to get closer. The bravest among them would dash onto the lawn, tap the concrete base of the pedestal, and then sprint away, screaming with exhilarated terror, as if they'd just touched a sleeping dragon. The adults were more divided, their allegiances declared in subtle ways. The pro-button faction, my silent majority, would give me a knowing nod or a thumbs up when they drove by. My next-door neighbor, Sarah, came over one evening with a plate of brownies, ostensibly to welcome me to the neighborhood, even though I'd lived there for 3 years. "My husband, Tom, and I are dying," she whispered conspiratorially as I met her at the door. "This is the most exciting thing to happen here since they repaved the cul-de-sac. Carol made us repaint our mailbox last spring because it was a non-sanctioned shade of black. It was the same black it was when we bought it. You, sir, are our hero." The anti-button faction, Carol's loyalists, were less subtle. They treated my property like it was radioactive. They'd cross the street to avoid walking in front of my house. Their glares could curdle milk. One of them, a perpetually angry-looking man named Gary, who was the HOA treasurer, confronted me while I was getting my mail. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" he sneered, puffing out his chest. "You're bringing down property values. This is a respectable community, not some art school prank." "Good morning to you too, Gary," I said cheerfully. "You know, stress is very bad for the heart. You should try meditating." He just sputtered and stormed off. Most of the neighborhood, however, fell into the camp of the morbidly curious. They were fascinated. They'd stop me when I was taking out the trash, their eyes flicking from me to the button and back again. "So, Jack, come on. Off the record. What's it do?" they'd ask. I'd just smile mysteriously. "I can't tell you," I'd say. "That would ruin the surprise." The conflict was bound to break containment. The spark was a single photo posted to the Pleasant Meadows Community Forum on Facebook by a nosy neighbor. The photo of the button, with the simple caption, "Anyone know what this is about?" went nuclear. Within hours, there were hundreds of comments. The post became a digital civil war. Brenda L. "This is an eyesore. My kids are scared of it. The HOA needs to do something." Tom R. "Scared of a button, Brenda? Lighten up. The guy who put it there is a legend. Carol has been terrorizing this neighborhood for years." Dave P. "Is it even legal? It looks like it could be a safety issue." Sarah K. It's a non-connected button on a concrete block, Dave. The only safety issue is dying of boredom from the beige conformity around here. Team button! The story was too weird, too suburban, too perfect for the local internet to ignore. It was picked up by a popular local blogger who ran a site called King County Curiosities. The headline read, "Suburban Rebel Wages Silent War Against HOA with Mystery Button." That article got the attention of the local news. One afternoon, a news van with a giant Channel 8 logo on the side pulled up in front of my house. A young, ambitious reporter named Tiffany, trailed by a cameraman with a massive rig on his shoulder, marched up my driveway. This was it, the big leagues. Seeing my opportunity to control the narrative, I graciously agreed to an on-camera interview. I put on a clean shirt and stood on my porch with the button looming in the background like my silent, stoic running mate. Tiffany was all business. "So, Jack, the whole town is buzzing. Everyone wants to know. What does the button do?" I looked earnestly into the camera, channeling every thoughtful tech CEO I'd ever seen in an interview. "Tiffany," I began, "this button is about more than just a function. It's a statement about choice, about curiosity, and about following the rules, even when they're silly. What it does is less important than the question it asks. In a world full of rules, what happens when you're presented with one simple, clear instruction? Do not push." I paused for dramatic effect. "It's a monument to restraint." The cameraman zoomed in on my face. I think I might have even seen Tiffany tear up a little. I came across as a charming, intelligent rogue, a philosophical prankster. Of course, for balanced journalism, they had to get Carol's side of the story. They found her trimming her hedges with what looked like surgical shears. She did not handle the spotlight well. Blinking in the camera's bright light, she came out looking completely unhinged, clutching a binder of HOA bylaws to her chest like a life preserver. "This is not about choice," she screeched, jabbing a finger towards my house. "It is about cohesive community aesthetics. It is about protecting our investments. He is a menace. That thing is a blight on our neighborhood and a clear violation of a dozen statutes, and it must be removed." The segment aired on the 6 o'clock news. The contrast was brutal. I was the calm, articulate folk hero. She was the shrieking, petty tyrant. Public opinion, which had already been leaning my way, swung decisively in my favor. My phone started buzzing with texts from friends who had seen it. "Dude, you're famous!" Being publicly humiliated on television sent Carol into a full-blown meltdown. She went from being a petty dictator to a desperate one, and desperate people do stupid things. First, she called an emergency HOA board meeting. According to Sarah, whose husband Tom was on the board, and was my inside source, the meeting was a disaster. The other board members, including Gary, were getting nervous about the bad press and the potential for a lawsuit. They were starting to see that Carol's personal vendetta was becoming a liability. So Carol tried a new tactic. If she couldn't get me on the yard art violation, she'd get me on something else. She hired a safety inspector to examine my property. The inspector, a greasy-looking man who turned out to be her brother-in-law, produced a report declaring that the pedestal's sharp corners constituted a severe tripping hazard for pedestrians. The HOA sent me another notice, demanding I mitigate the hazard immediately. I mitigated it. I went to the hardware store and bought 4 small, tasteful, solar-powered garden lights and placed them neatly at each corner of the pedestal. Not only did it solve the hazard, but it beautifully illuminated the button at night, making it look even more dramatic and important. Her next move was just sad. She started a stakeout. I'd see her car parked down the street, or catch her peering through her window with a pair of binoculars. She was convinced that I was sneaking out at night to do something with the button. She thought she could catch me in the act, so I started having fun with it, Once or twice a day, I'd walk out to the pedestal with a solemn expression. I'd circle it slowly. I'd polish the red button with a microfiber cloth. Then I'd nod thoughtfully to myself and walk back inside, giving her absolutely nothing to work with. I could feel her frustration from across the street. The final straw came in the form of a thick, menacing envelope delivered by a courier. It was from the HOA's lawyer. The letter was 5 pages of pure, unadulterated legal intimidation. It used words like cease and desist, injunction, and litigation. It accused me of creating a public nuisance, violating covenants, and causing the board undue distress. It threatened to sue me for the removal costs of the offending structure, plus legal fees, and place a lien on my house if I didn't comply. It gave me a final ultimatum: remove the button and pedestal within 24 hours or face the full legal wrath of the Pleasant Meadows Homeowners Association. The pressure was at its absolute peak. They had called in the big guns. Carol was going for the kill. I knew I couldn't keep this standoff going forever. I needed an end game. It was time to let someone push the button. Carol expected me to cave. She expected a frantic call, a white flag of surrender. She must have been sitting by her phone, savoring her impending victory. She didn't get one. Instead of hiring a lawyer or calling Dave to schedule a demolition, I opened my laptop and drafted an email. The subject line read, "An open forum on the future of lawn expression in Pleasant Meadows." I sent it to the entire neighborhood email list. "Dear neighbors," it began. "In light of recent events and legal threats concerning a certain installation on my property, I believe it's time we had a community conversation. I invite you all to an open forum on my front lawn tomorrow at 5 p.m. sharp. Let's discuss our community standards, our rules, and the role of creativity in our neighborhood. Refreshments will be served." I was turning her legal threat into a public spectacle, a town hall meeting. On the battlefield itself, I also, of course, anonymously tipped off Tiffany at Channel 8. If this was going to be the final showdown, it was damn well going to be on the evening news. The next day at 5 p.m., my lawn looked like a music festival. It seemed like the entire neighborhood had turned out. There were families with kids, elderly couples in lawn chairs, and curious teenagers. Sarah and Tom were there, giving me encouraging smiles. Gary and the other anti-button loyalists were clustered together near Carol, their arms crossed, looking like a disapproving panel of judges. And just as I'd hoped, the Channel 8 news van was parked at the curb, camera at the ready. I stood on my front porch, a table with a large pitcher of iced tea and a stack of plastic cups beside me, feeling like a general about to address his troops. Carol, seeing her private legal threat had become a public circus, seized the moment to make her case. She marched to the center of the lawn, holding her binder of bylaws aloft like a holy text. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice quivering with righteous fury. "For weeks our community has been subjected to this mockery." She gestured wildly at the button. "Our bylaws are not a joke. They are the bedrock of this community. They protect our property values. They ensure a serene and orderly environment for our families. We are a community of standards, not a place for juvenile pranks." She went on for 5 minutes, a long, rambling tirade about aesthetic cohesion and the slippery slope of non-compliance. "First it's a button," she warned, her eyes wild. "Then what? Cars on blocks, unkempt hedges, anarchy?" The crowd was silent, listening. When she finally ran out of steam, all eyes turned to me. I took a slow sip of iced tea, set the cup down, and offered a calm smile. "Carol makes some good points," I said, my voice relaxed and conversational. "Rules are important, and I can assure you I have followed every single rule in that book she's holding." I looked out at the crowd of my neighbors. "This button and its pedestal are 100% compliant with city code and HOA regulations. I have the paperwork to prove it. The only rule being broken here, I said, pointing towards the sign, is the one that says do not push. And so far every single one of you has shown remarkable restraint and respect for that rule. I'm proud of you all. A tense silence fell over the lawn. My speech had disarmed her. The standoff was complete. All eyes drifted, as if drawn by a magnetic force, to the button. It sat there, gleaming in the late afternoon sun, the silent, enigmatic heart of the whole conflict. It was a monument to a suburban Cold War, and the tension was unbearable. What now? Would the crowd just awkwardly disperse? Would the HOA just have to accept its defeat? Then, from the back of Carol's angry little cluster, a figure emerged. It was a lanky, awkward teenager with glasses and an expression of profound, soul-deep exasperation. It was Carol's son, Kevin. A quiet, nerdy kid I'd only ever seen being ferried to and from what I assumed were deeply unfun extracurricular activities. He had clearly been dragged along to this meeting by his mother, and he had reached his breaking point. He'd had enough of the speeches, enough of the bylaws, enough of his mother's public crusade. He saw his moment. A moment to end it all. A moment of glorious, teenage rebellion. "Oh, for God's sake," he muttered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. He started walking. Not running, but strolling with a casual, deliberate insolence. He walked right past his mother, who let out a horrified gasp. "Kevin, what are you doing? Kevin, stop right now!" He didn't stop. He walked right up to the pedestal, looked down at the big red button, looked out at the crowd and the news camera with a small, defiant smirk, and with a dramatic flourish that would make a stage actor proud. He pushed the button. There was a loud, satisfying click. For a full 2 seconds, the world held its breath. Nothing happened. I saw a flash of disappointment on some faces. Had it all been a bluff? And then it happened. Pop! Hiss! From 4 small, cleverly hidden nozzles Dave and I had installed at the base of the pedestal, 2 massive streams of multicolored paper confetti and shimmering, biodegradable glitter shot 20 feet into the air. The payload was perfectly calculated, catching the breeze and showering the entire front lawn, and most of the assembled crowd, in a joyous, chaotic explosion of color. Simultaneously, a weatherproof speaker I had hidden in a thick azalea bush crackled to life. It was my voice, pre-recorded, booming with the cheerful energy of a game show host. "Congratulations! You have failed this simple test. Please enjoy this mandatory HOA compliant celebration." And as the final touch, the speaker immediately began blasting Katrina and the Waves' ridiculously upbeat anthem, "Walking on Sunshine." There was a moment of pure, stunned silence. The entire neighborhood, including the news crew, stood frozen, blinking as rainbow confetti gently drifted down around them. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a single person started to laugh. A deep, hearty belly laugh. It was Tom, Sarah's husband. His laugh broke the spell. Another person snorted, then another. Within seconds, the entire lawn erupted in a wave of uproarious, cathartic laughter. The tension that had gripped the neighborhood for weeks didn't just break, it vaporized in a cloud of glitter. Kids shrieked with delight, scooping up handfuls of confetti and throwing it at each other. Tiffany, the reporter, had her microphone in one hand, trying to give a report while wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. Kevin, the button pusher, stood in the center of it all, a hero, a liberator, a triumphant grin on his face. He had freed them. And Carol? Carol was mortified. She was covered in pink and blue glitter, which clashed horribly with her beige blazer. Her authority, her power, her carefully constructed world of rules and order, it had all been completely and utterly dismantled by a pop song and a pound of confetti. She sputtered, trying to yell something, but her voice was drowned out by the music and the laughter. Defeated, she turned and stormed away, her son trailing behind her, walking on sunshine for the first time in his life. The aftermath was swift. The clip of the confetti explosion was the lead story on the news that night and went viral online. The Pleasant Meadows HOA became a regional laughingstock. Faced with overwhelming public ridicule, the board held an emergency vote the following week. Amendment 1138B was quietly and unanimously rescinded. The lawyer's threatening letter was never mentioned again. My story ends a week later. I'm on my porch, enjoying the evening air and a cold beer with Dave, my co-conspirator. The pedestal and the button are still there. They're a permanent fixture now, a beloved local landmark. Kids leave it offerings sometimes. A cool rock, a flower. In the spot where the gnomes used to be, there's a new addition. I'd placed it there this morning. It's a single, beautiful, plastic pink flamingo, standing proudly on one leg. Tucked into the grass beside it is a tiny, laminated sign in the same Helvetica font as its predecessor. This one has only one word on it: art. And in Pleasant Meadows, for the first time in a long time, no one says a single word against it. I raise my bottle. To malicious compliance, I say. Dave grins, clinking his bottle against mine. To malicious compliance,